Welcome to the Real GI Doc Show. I am your host, Dr. Fred Gandolfo, and I'm a board-certified gastroenterologist with a medical practice in New York. Today's episode was supposed to just be a quickie, but I decided to film it because I'm still testing out my setup, and I think I pretty much got it where I need it. I have a guest slot right here, and we're going to be starting that in the next episode. But today, I still just have a solo for you, but that's okay. It's an interesting one. It comes to us from a listener named Michael, and Michael wrote me a very detailed and very interesting email recently, as well as he left an audio message with some commentary. So I'm going to play the audio message first because I think he has a lot of good points, and he has an amazing voice. I don't know Michael personally, but his voice is awesome. I wish that he had a podcast because I would listen to that voice. It's a radio voice for sure. So listen to this. This is Michael with some info on his colonoscopy experience.
Hi, Dr. Gandolfo. My name is Mike. Your ebook was very helpful to me when I got my colonoscopy about 8 months ago, and I listened to your podcast. I saw your solicitation for input from patients about their colonoscopy experience, and after considering that your voicemail service might have a time limit on what I could say, I decided to type up a summary of my thoughts, and I sent it to your email account. I hope that these reflections will have some value to future patients, and if you also think that that's true, then feel free to reach out to me. My email address is @gmail.com. Thanks for asking, for a very informative ebook, and for your interesting podcast. Have a great day.
All right, so that's Michael's message, and pardon the fact that I removed some of his personal information because I don't know if he wants to share that with the world or whatever, but I think his delivery of that message was pretty cool. So here's the email that he sent me, and I'm going to go into this email point by point. It's really just tips on what to do for a colonoscopy and maybe some good things to talk about regarding having a safe and high quality colonoscopy that Michael brings up that are really good topics to discuss today. So without further lead in, except for the fact that this is not medical advice, it's just a gastroenterologist talking about gastroenterology stuff on a podcast and on a YouTube video, but I'm not talking to you directly. Unless you're my patient, then you have to come to the office and get this talk. But that being said, here's Michael's email. So he said, what did I learn? Well, there is misleading or at least unhelpful information out there, but there's also a lot of good advice as well. Here are some examples of both. And this is the first point. The notion of selecting your endoscopist might make you feel as though you were having some agency with respect to your healthcare. But in the end, patients cannot possibly learn the information required to make an informed choice of endoscopist, even if you supply the questions, as you did in Chapter 6 of your ebook. And Michael's referring to the free colonoscopy ebook that I wrote several years ago that's actually due for an upgrade. But Chapter 6, I talked a lot about how to find a good doctor to do your procedure. And even if you, the patient, knows what to do with the answers, there is more of a general lament than anything specific to endoscopists. It disappointed and depressed me to learn that a patient with healthcare needs cannot possibly learn enough to make an informed decision about who should provide it. Physicians are rated in some databases, and you can find if you look hard enough, but this information is meaningless. You can sometimes even find records of physicians who have been sued, but this is also useless. I suppose that many patients find themselves in situations where they need high-level care and end up getting treated by physicians who they would never select if they knew the facts. Now, this is a really interesting point. And in that chapter of my ebook about colonoscopy, I talked about how to try to select a quality endoscopist because endoscopist is just like the term for a person who performs endoscopies, any type of endoscopic procedure. So this is typically a gastroenterologist, in some places it's a colorectal surgeon, and in some places in the country it's a family medicine doctor doing some type of endoscopic screening procedures, but mostly it's gastroenterology doctors. So you can call yourself an endoscopist if you do a lot of endoscopies, colonoscopies. And the question is, like, how do you find a high quality endoscopist? Not everyone does it equally. I've talked about this in the show a few times now, but it's it's kind of shocking how the quality of the exam really, as you can imagine, it really matters. So if someone does a really quick exam and just looks in there and takes the scope out in 2 minutes, then they're not going to find the polyps that can grow into cancer as you get older. And the exam was kind of pointless. It didn't really protect you from anything. It didn't provide any type of service for you. It just was a quick look to make sure you don't have a big tumor, and then they're out of there. So the sad reality is that many doctors practice like this, and it's very hard to figure out who's who, because everyone's pretty nice, they should be nice to their patients, but you can't tell by necessarily if the person's nice or not nice or whatever. Some people are speed demons and just get in and out as quick as possible, and all the data shows that that's not good for patient care and really doesn't detect polyps and remove polyps and all that. So how do you tell? And I had a couple of points in my ebook that I wrote about really trying to get a feel for the doctor, like a feel for the practice, and how is it a factory? Are you number one of 80 people who are coming in for screening colonoscopy visits that day to the factory, and they're in and out in 2 seconds, or you don't even see the doctor? If you want to get a feel for the practice, you kind of have to see how they treat you when you come in. So that's really part of it. Now, you can have a really nice concierge type practice and still do a really poor job on colonoscopy. That's definitely possible. And Michael's point is that you really can't know. And I think that's partially true. You really can't know unless you're on the inside and know some healthcare providers who work with a physician. And really, you have to ask anesthesiologists and nurses, because other GI doctors, but other doctors don't even know. Like, family doctors who refer to certain people who are low quality endoscopists, they don't really know that either. So you can't, even if you ask your family doctor, then they're not entirely sure, because they're not there like watching the exam happen. They don't see the colonoscopy happen. So it's a little scary. And the truth is you don't really know. So you have to take a little bit of a leap of faith. You go by people's experiences, some word of mouth. You try to ask around, you look at reviews. And at some point, that's probably the best you can do, unless you married a gastroenterologist or have one in the family or whatnot. But how do you know that person is a great endoscopist either? You just don't know. So it's really hard. And how do you know that how do I know that I'm a good endoscopist? And everyone thinks they're probably great, right? So this is like a silly discussion to even have. But there are a couple of quality metrics that you can follow, and these are not publicly available, so you have to ask. And even if you ask, you might not get the answer that is truthful or whatever it is. So the biggest one you can ask about is adenoma detection rate. So an adenoma is a small precancerous polyp or a large precancerous polyp, but it's a precancerous lesion in the colon. And if you take a bunch of people going in for screening colonoscopies, meaning like asymptomatic people, no family history, just needs a colonoscopy, and you do a colonoscopy and you find an adenoma, that counts as a catch. That counts as 1 out of 1 or whatever it is, how many people you're doing colonoscopies on. So if you do 100 colonoscopies, you should find adenomas in a certain percentage of people. And there's a bare minimum rate that's around 25% in men and women. That's what you're supposed to find out there. And if you're really looking, you find a lot more than that. So if you're really looking, you find almost 40 to 50% in people. So people walking around with no symptoms, 40 to 50% of people should have a small precancerous polyp in there that you find. And some of those people will end up having colon cancer or a big polyp, but on average, a couple of small polyps or 1 or 2 small polyps, you should find that in roughly almost approaching half of the population. And that's a really, that means you're really looking. If you're finding all the polyps, you're really looking. And in the best studies, that's kind of the numbers that they come up with. And there's a lot of people out there who are finding less than 5%, 10% of the population that they screen that have polyps, which means it doesn't mean that they have a particularly healthy population. It just means that they're missing the polyps. They're not looking hard enough, or they're not looking long enough, or they're not spending the time to do their job. So it's a shame. And if you ask people directly, I think that's the best way to find out what their adenoma detection rate is. Just ask the doctor. And if they don't tell you, or they can't tell you because they don't even know what you're talking about, then that's a sign that you should go somewhere else, because they're not focusing on quality. If they make up a number that makes no sense, that's a sign you should go somewhere else, because they're lying to you. They're not focusing on quality. So if they say it's 3% or it's 99%, those are dumb numbers. So that's a lie. If they say something where it's 32% or 39% or 42%, those are decent numbers. They're somewhat above the where they're supposed to be. And if they say it's 15% or 20%, that's not a good job. They're not really doing their due diligence while they're looking in your colon. So you're going to sleep, you're drinking the prep, you're doing the whole exam, you want to make sure they're really doing the job. They're really looking under the hood and checking everything out. So that's the story. Ask about the adenoma detection rate and see what happens. When people ask me about the adenoma detection rate, I look like this. I'm like, I can't believe you asked that question. That's so cool. And most of the time they say, oh, well, because I saw it on your website or something. So it takes away the fun of it. But yes, I'm waiting for the person to ask me the adenoma detection rate one day. That would be pretty cool. But no one ever does. And people are nervous about getting their colonoscopies. They think all the doctors are the same. And, the truth is just, find someone who looks decent, and you have to get it done at some point. So it's better than getting cancer of the colon, but try to find a good doctor. And the whole thing about the reviews and the people who have been sued, you could be sued for anything. Every doctor's been sued a couple times. Some of them are real. Some of them are completely frivolous nonsense things. But you can't go by, unless you see a pattern, if you're going to search the databases, that's also kind of ridiculous. Like, how much time do you have? You're going to sit there and be a legal scholar. That's not a great use of your time either. Looking at reviews is somewhat helpful. I find reviews are somewhat truthful, but you're never as good as they say you are, and you're never as bad as they say you are usually either. So it's kind of, you read some reviews, you get the general gist of the way the person is or the practice runs. But if all the reviews are bad, that's not a good sign. And if all the reviews are really good, it means the person's probably decent. And that's the story. And people can, write fake reviews and whatnot, but it's pretty easy to tell. Okay, enough about that. So this is the second point in Michael's email. He wrote, the timing of the appointment matters. And is that true? Does the timing of the appointment matter? He wrote, the ideal time to get a colonoscopy is about 1 to 3 p.m. Exactly why is a longer story, which I will not get into here. So that's interesting. So this has been looked at before in studies about the timing, and they call it like where you are in the queue, like in the line of people to get colonoscopies. So in my office, our first case starts at 7:30, sometimes 7 o'clock in the morning. Some places start at 5:30 in the morning, whatever, some ungodly hour. Some places start at 8, but basically you start sometime in the early morning. No one wants to fast all day. People just want to get these things over with, and you go till sometime in the early afternoon or noontime, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, whatever it is. And some places scope in the afternoon. If you're running an ASC and you're going all day long, you may scope till 5 p.m. And most people don't want to come in that late because they don't want to starve all day. But some people wake up at 11 o'clock because they're night owls and whatever. So everyone has a choice of when they want to go. They've looked at this thing in terms of where you are in the line, and there was a whole theory about endoscopist fatigue. Like if you went in later in the day, the doctor's probably tired because he's done 10 or 15 cases already, and now you're number 16 and everyone's hungry and they want to go home and they're tired. So they might miss polyps at that point. And there were some initial studies that I remember reading back when I was a fellow that said that that's probably true. You don't want to come in after a certain time because the doctor gets tired. And then there's a bunch of studies that show that that's not true at all, and it doesn't really matter where you are in the queue. You'll find the same adenoma detection basically throughout, as long as the doctor is a high quality individual and really looking. And I think that's probably true. Most people doing this job are professionals, and if I have to do a case at 7:30 in the morning or 11:30 in the morning or 2 o'clock, I'm still going to spend the time and do the right job. Every individual patient is, or should be, treated as like the first case of the day. My ideal time to do an endoscopy or a colonoscopy, I truthfully think the cases done first thing in the morning tend to be the most on time, and you're the freshest. But the day goes on, you get hungry, you get tired, you still just, I don't know, I feel like I still do the same performance. It's like just the way it is. I don't know. So I don't know if the queue time really matters too much. I wouldn't say that 1 to 3 p.m. is the greatest time either, because typically you don't take a lunch break when you're doing procedures. So everyone's kind of really hungry and kind of done with the day at that time. I think the ideal time to get a colonoscopy is sometime in the morning, but it's really whenever you're comfortable, and it's kind of whenever you get there. So I wouldn't put too much into that. That's kind of micromanaging the day a little bit. Number 3, your discussion of prescription preps in Chapter 8 of your ebook was very helpful. For the record, I chose Suprep and had a very good result. Well, that's cool. I used Suprep too, and I had a colonoscopy, and it tastes pretty gross, but it works fine. And there's a bunch of alternatives out there. Some taste maybe a little better. Some taste a little worse. There's pills out there. There's a whole bunch of YouTube videos on my channel. You can look at different preps that you can take for colonoscopy, and they all kind of work, and you just have to drink them. There's really no way around it, unfortunately. This is the 4th point. The Suprep is not gross, unless you convince yourself that it is. The taste is kind of like Kool-Aid with cough syrup. The problem is that you have a video on YouTube where you suggest that patients might find the taste so bad that they might vomit the prep. And I do. I have a video on YouTube where I pretend to vomit the prep because lots of people call and say they're vomiting the prep. So I think it's funny, and 2 million people can't be wrong. But Michael goes on to say, beware the power of suggestion. The better message is to remind patients that bowel prep is not a cocktail. Bowel prep is medicine and must be treated as such. Well, it's absolutely true. Michael's absolutely true here. Absolutely right here, I should say. Yes, I should not put the idea into people's mind they're going to throw up, but I also want to throw a little comedy into my channel because I'm just so hilarious. So, of course, not everyone throws up the prep, but I was trying to show that if you drink it too fast, you can throw up. So take it slowly and go at your own pace. But yes, it's not likely that you'll vomit the prep. So if you have a fear of vomiting prep, then don't think about it too much because it's highly unlikely that that's going to happen. Okay, there's the fifth point now. Chilling the prep ahead of time for easier dosing is a good suggestion. If you think about it long enough, you can figure out why. Yep, I thought about it long enough. It is a good idea because your taste buds don't taste cold stuff very well. So the colder the liquid is, the less taste it stimulates in your body. And that's the reason why I can figure it out. There may be other more interesting reasons, but I'm not sure. So I say put the prep in the fridge first, make it pretty cold. You don't want to drink ice water. You'll get really cold. Your internal temperature will get cold from just the amount of prep, but make it cold. You don't have to freeze it. It makes it a little easier to go down. Warm prep is pretty disgusting, I have to say. And that's what happens in the hospital. When you're in the hospital, you're trying to get these poor sick people to drink prep who are sick already because they're in the hospital. And the prep comes, served room temperature and sits on the tray all day. It's just like insult to injury. So it'd be nice if the hospital brought one of those little champagne, what are they called? Little coolers they put the champagne bottle in next to your table. They should bring one of those with the Go Lightly in it. I'm sure the folks would love that. And then this is, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Point number 6. Drinking the prep through a straw for easier dosing is a bad suggestion. If you think about it long enough, you can figure out why. Well, yes, I in my video, I did say that you should not drink the prep through a straw. Some people actually love it, and a lot of people in the YouTube comments, there's like 1,000-something comments on that video, say that they like to drink the prep through the straw because it makes it easier. They don't have to taste it. I found my experience was that drinking it through the straw just prolonged the prep experience and made me kind of drink it, taste it more for whatever reason. So I was not a fan of the straw. It was better just to gulp it down. But everyone's individual, so who knows? The straw is a plus minus. This is now the next point. I think it's did I say 7? Who knows? I lost count. I never read or saw a video of advice from anyone who stated the time of each prep session from the start of the dose to when it is safe to relinquish control of the bathroom. As it turned out in my case, the time period for each of the split dose sessions was fairly well defined. It would have been helpful to know this information ahead of time, even if I were informed that there was a wide range for this part of the procedure. So what he's referring to is when you drink the prep, how much time does it take to kind of go through your system? Can you drink it in the car on the way home if you live 20 minutes away? Or do you have to sit on the throne and drink it there? And the truth is everybody's really different here, and it's very hard to predict. So I may have used this phrase in the past, but basically some people can open up the prep and smell it and they start going to the bathroom. It's like a Pavlovian response. Some people drink the entire prep, both doses of the prep, and nothing happens. And then a few hours later, they start to go. That's pretty rare, but that does happen occasionally. What often happens is you drink the prep and within a half an hour to an hour after the first dose, you're having a million bowel movements. So that's usually how it goes. It's usually pretty quick. A lot of people, they're halfway through the prep and they start to go, and then it just accelerates from there. But definitely some people who are very chronically constipated at baseline have issues with getting the prep done kind of rapidly enough. So they'll drink the prep and then nothing happens for hours, and then they come into the office and they're not really fully cleaned out because they should have waited maybe another 5 hours. So when that's the case, I often counsel people to take the prep a little earlier in the day. So if it normally you started around 5 o'clock in the evening, that's like the standard thing. I tell people to take it around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and this gives them some more time to get the prep going through their system. And that's just generic advice. We change it for every patient depending on what this story is. So yeah, there's a wide range there. It's hard to predict. The next point, there is important information in the clinical literature that my endoscopist considered ridiculous and actually was ridiculous. And by all indications, I was fortunate enough to have a great endoscopist. I would provide details, but this email is long enough already. I don't know what to say there. So I'm just going to keep going because I don't know what he's talking about there. Speaking of which, I'll include one more thing and stop. Parentheses, you're welcome. Those occult blood screening tests that are advertised on television that you can use at home and mail in, like Cologuard, are dangerous and should be banned. Seriously. not because they are harmful in their own right, but because as poor substitutes for good health practices, such as an actual colonoscopy, they eventually deceive and otherwise disservice patients. So yes, I think that's a good point. I don't know if Cologuard really should be banned. That's pretty aggressive. I think that the more screening modalities we have, the better. I think Cologuard and other non-invasive tests are inherently always going to be flawed when they are compared to the invasive tests like colonoscopy, because Cologuard has a very high false positive rate and a significant false negative rate. So I covered this once I'll link the episode talking about Cologuard, but I definitely covered these stats in a little more boring detail. But the false positive rate for Cologuard is pretty high, meaning if you have 100 people that have a positive Cologuard and you do colonoscopies in all of them, that's like what the studies basically did, what did they find? So they found that 45% of those positive Cologuards had absolutely nothing going on. So truly false positives, totally normal colonoscopy. 45% of people who had a positive Cologuard had a truly normal colonoscopy. Now, out of the other 55%, what was their fate? 4% had cancer. So that's what Cologuard is looking for. It's looking for cancer. So it picks it up. When it's positive, it picks it up 4% of the time. There's actually a cancer there. So those people were true positives. But the other 51% of people, they weren't negative and they weren't really positive for cancer, but they had polyps, precancerous polyps. So it depends on how you look at the data. If you consider the Cologuard as a colon cancer test, like a colon cancer detection test, it doesn't miss a lot of cancers. It's pretty good at finding cancer. And we'll go into that in a second. But if you're thinking of a Cologuard as a colon cancer prevention test, kind of like a colonoscopy is, because you can go in and remove the polyps, it's not really as helpful for prevention. It's pretty good for detection. If you want to know if you have cancer right now, not really great for preventing cancer in the future. So that's the deal with Cologuard. 51% of those people with positive Cologuards will have a precancerous polyp in there, and that's a positive too. So it means it's missing a bunch of stuff too. So let's look at the people who have negative Cologuard. So if you do a Cologuard, it's negative, you're good to go. They say, great, come back in 3 years. Less than 1% of people with a negative Cologuard will actually have cancer, although it does miss cancer at a decent rate. Cancer is not as common, so it's a less than 1% chance if you have a negative Cologuard that you'll have an actual cancer found on a colonoscopy. If it's done, the week later, 66% of people with a negative Cologuard will have nothing, which is a true negative. So that's the way the test is supposed to work. But 34% of people with a negative Cologuard will have a precancerous polyp. So that's an issue. So not really great at preventing. It's missing 34% of polyps. So that's not a great thing. If you're doing a colonoscopy, the miss rate for polyps is lower, but still there. So it's not a perfect test either. So that being said, I don't think the Cologuard test should be banned. I think that you just need to know like what you're doing with the test. If you're having the Cologuard test because you think it's as good as a colonoscopy, it's not a perfect alternative. If you're having the Cologuard test because there's no way in hell that you're going to get a colonoscopy, then it's a great test for you. Do whatever you can. Just know that you're trading the convenience of the test for the protection that it gives you. So it's definitely not a substitute for colonoscopy, but it's definitely a great thing to do if you're going to do nothing. So you should definitely do it. Cologuard if you're going to do nothing. Then the final closing remarks here by Michael. And finally, your ebook was very helpful, and I like your podcast. Sincerely, Michael. So that's the email. Thank you, Michael, for listening, and thank you for writing this very interesting and thought-provoking email, which helped me kind of spell out some of these points that are common patient concerns. And you were very you articulated this very, very well, better than I can speak. So that's the story with Michael. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this, and I would love some more questions to be submitted. I have actually a whole bunch of Q&A questions that I have listed out now. I'm just going to try to rapid fire answer in the next month or so. They've been building up, and I've been not doing my job doing a good Q&A session really with multiple different questions. I don't think you guys you don't really need a book every time I answer a question. It doesn't need to be like a 45-minute answer. But a couple of these are quick 5-minute questions, and I'll try to do a whole bunch of them in the next month or so. And hopefully the next episode will be a special guest, because I want to test out the little side of the other side of this table, which has the other station sitting there for a guest. So psyched about that. I think we finally nailed down the lighting and everything else. Although I'll see later when I put this on YouTube what it looks like. All right. Thanks for listening. And here is our wonderful disclaimer. I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode of The Real GI Doc Show. Please subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast player to catch my next episode. If you really want to show your appreciation for the show, take a moment to rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts. It only takes a few seconds and is the best way to get other people to discover the show. If you use social media, you can find me under the handle @RealGIDoc, so feel free to follow, leave a comment, or just say hi. If you have a question about something gastro-related that you'd like me to answer on an upcoming episode, go to realgidoc.com or use the link in the show notes to leave me an audio question.
That's it for this episode of The Real GI Doc Show. Make sure to join Dr. Gandolfo next time to explore another interesting topic in gastrointestinal health. And remember, the views and opinions presented in today's episode are for informational and entertainment purposes only. Nothing discussed in this episode should be considered or used as a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. If you're experiencing a health issue, please consult with a doctor or a medical provider in your area. Thanks again for listening to the show.